morning, everyone. It's great to see you. During this session, we're a nice select group. If you're in a quiet place, please unmute yourself. In which case, let's dive in. So, where we're going next is to talk very briefly about metaphor. So, a metaphor is literally something that compares one kind of thing to another kind of thing. But what's interesting about metaphor, particularly when it comes to innovation, is that metaphor is the native language of the unconscious mind. It's the stuff of thought. And when we use metaphor, when we compare one kind of thing to another kind of thing, it inspires new connections and new ideas. Clean language, which is one of the things we're going to be using during this session, is a specialist tool for inquiring into metaphor. But let's get warmed up with metaphor first. So here's the next question for you to think about, first in the privacy of your own brain, and then to talk about in the session. So first, please take a moment to think about your answer to this question. When you are innovating at your best, you are like what? It's one of those questions with no right or wrong answer. When you're innovating at your best, you might be like a creative genius. You might be like Albert Einstein. You might, but don't answer in the chat this time for the moment. Hold your horses. And if you've got a notebook or pencil, draw your answer. So when you're innovating at your best, maybe it's like you're holding your horses and you're desperately trying not to be carried off with your brilliant ideas. Maybe when you're innovating at your best, you're like a rocket ship to the moon. Maybe when you're innovating at your best, you're like a Zen monk meditating and the brilliant ideas pop out of the top of your head. Whatever it is for you is the right answer to this question. So when you are innovating at your best, you are like what? Gabriella?
Yeah, sorry, Judy, just a quick question. What's the difference between a metaphor and an analogy?
Metaphor, in the sense that I'm using it, includes analogy.
Okay.
It also includes synonyms. It includes a whole bunch of other technical terms that you would have experienced in your secondary school English lessons. But metaphor here is being used to encompass all of that stuff.
Okay.
It would also include stories, parables, and stuff like that.
Thank you.
Has everybody got some kind of answer to the question, when you're innovating at your best, you're like what? In which case, let's move on to the next instructions. You're going to be in small groups of 2 and probably 3s, but there might be a 2 or 2. And your job in your small groups is to spend 5 minutes comparing your answers. But here's the thing. Pay attention to the differences between your answers. You'll find similarities, but notice the differences as well. And when you come back, we'll hear some of the answers. We'll also get everybody to put it in the chat when you come back. But first, have a conversation in small groups. James, are you good to send the group out? Is that everybody back?
I love that exercise.
What did you learn?
Just how different everybody kind of has interpreted that. We had 3 really, really super different kind of ideas, and it was really fascinating.
Thank you. Anybody have a different or a similar experience? Maha?
We actually had a lot of similarities, and then we had to struggle to find the differences. So we had waterfall fireworks and thunderstorms. And so they were all pretty big and abundant and with aggressive elements of them. But then one of the things that Katie noticed towards the end was, well, 2 things. Well, and also the potential for disruption. but then the differences between them were like, she was saying like fireworks don't have a lasting impact on the environment, but like waterfalls would have a lasting impact, and the thunderstorm somewhere in the middle, they have an impact for a little bit and then that disappears. So that was interesting to think through.
Interesting. Waterfalls, thunderstorms, and what was the
Fireworks.
third one? Fireworks.
Two
Waterfalls,
natural, one man-made.
yeah. So isn't that interesting? You can pay attention to the similarities, or you can pay attention to the differences, and you'll get different conversations depending which you do. Now, one of the reasons that I suggested you pay attention to the differences is that in mixers like this, where you're meeting strangers, especially, you're much more likely to seek out similarities. It's just a natural human tendency to see if we can find what's in common. But often we can have more interesting conversations when we look for the differences and notice what's different about us and what's unique and what's special about each individual. Let me take this game to the next level, if it's okay with you. I'm going to spotlight myself so you can read my slides. Here's where we're going next. We're going to talk a little bit about clean language. Now, clean language was created by the late David Grove, and it's used in a whole bunch of situations at the moment, all sorts of places where a precision questioning technique that can really help people to understand each other and what they mean by what they say. Well, that's useful in a whole bunch of situations. I often use it with teams, helping them to coalesce as teams more effectively. But I'll also use it with groups. I use it as a coaching technique. It's also being used increasingly in academic research. I could talk more and more about the places where clean language is being used. But what I want you to do is get into playing with it. And I'll just try and explain only what needs to be explained in order for you to have a go with it. I'll mention that my association with clean language goes back about 17 years. About 15 years ago, shortly after David Grove died, this book, Clean Language, Revealing Metaphors and Opening Minds, was published by Wendy Sullivan and myself. It was the first popular book about clean language. The earlier books had been very much about the therapeutic applications of clean language, but this one brought it into the everyday. And mentioned in the slides is a free ebook called Your Clean Language Questions Answered. So if you want to read more and you don't want to spend money on an actual book, that link will take you to a free ebook. Just definition of clean language: a precision inquiry framework optimized for exploring the metaphors in people's language and thinking, useful for exploring unknown unknowns in complex contexts. That's a sort of rough definition. It's useful to have that sometimes. What David Grove realized was that metaphor was the stuff of thought. Now, that was not a realization that was unique to him. It was a realization that was emerging during the 70s and 80s, which was when David was creating his work. The popular book that came out by Lakoff and Johnson called Metaphors We Live By pointed out that metaphor wasn't just a frill on the top of literary language. You know, the fact that Shakespeare would use metaphors like Juliet is the sun. It was quoted in every English language training lesson in every secondary school. But metaphor was more than that. Metaphor was actually how we think. And David Grove figured out that he could use this precision question set to find out about the metaphors that people were talking about. The questions, here are two example questions. These are the ones we're going to use in the activity in a moment. They've been nicknamed the Lazy Jedi questions. I'll talk about that if you're curious, but just for the purposes of this, let's just go with that's their name. Here are two example questions. What kind of X? And is there anything else about X where the X stands for one or more of the person's words. So if somebody says, oh, it's like fireworks, I might ask, what kind of fireworks? Or is there anything else about fireworks? And then I might ask the next question about whatever they answer next, or I could go back and ask again about, is there anything else about fireworks? So that's how they work. They're very simple questions. And if you find them uncomfortable, just pretend you're putting quote marks around the other person's words that you're quoting. They do work grammatically. Does that make sense in theory? Because the next thing that's going to happen is some practice. Let me explain what's going to happen. You're going to be in groups of 3 again. I think the same groups, with the exception that I've forgotten who it was who's going to be dropping off the call at past, so one person isn't going to join. So there's going to be 3s and a 2. And here's what you're going to do. You're going to say a sentence or just say a few words about your answer to that question. When you're innovating your best, you're like, what? And the other person, the questioner, is going to spend about 5 minutes asking, what kind of X? And is there anything else about X about your answer? The third person, if there is one, will be the observer. Now, there's going to be 10 minutes for this activity, so divide up the time. If you're in a 2, it's 5 minutes each way. If you're in a 3, go for 3 minutes each and swap round. The observer's job is to notice the time, so make sure that it swaps round at 3 minutes. Take it in turns, so everybody has a turn as the questioner, as the answerer, and as the observer. Now, at this point, typically, we need a little bit quick demonstration. Is there anybody who's willing to be, David, would you be willing to be the demonstration subject? I know it's very early in the morning for you, but
It's
would you?
4 a.m. for him. Give him
Yeah.
a
So, David, when you are innovating at your best, you are like what?
A tornado.
A tornado. What kind of
Mhm.
tornado?
One of those ones that you think of when maybe you think of a movie or a news report. It's kind of narrow at the bottom, and then it kind of winds its way up and gets wider at the top. And it's got, it maybe touches the ground in a very narrow part, but there's all kinds of wind and debris swirling maybe more and more as it kind of goes up the funnel.
Is there anything else about swirling?
Well, as in the imagery or as it relates to innovation?
Whatever you'd like to answer.
Yeah, I think some of the things fall out of the funnel and the currents of the wind, and some stay in and keep getting swirled around and mixed in, and maybe they bump into other things. And it's not always linear. Sometimes it twists, and maybe it looks like it's going to fall over, but then it rights itself again.
Thank you. And that's it. That's it. Thank you very much. That's a brilliant demonstration. Do you get the idea? Okay. As we know, the chat isn't going to sustain, so the instructions for this activity are on pages 11 and 12 of the slide deck. So please refer to those in order to get the questions. You're going to have 10 minutes, and we're going to keep the groups the same as they were last time. So I'm going to open the rooms now. If you can't join, just don't join. And if you've just joined the call, I think there's one person who's just joined the call, please hang here or join the group and people will explain. Okay, let's open the rooms. Let's see what happens. Whoosh. So how was that? What did you discover? How was it when you were asked those questions?
I can share. I remember doing this, I think, about 15 years ago, Judy, at the London Coaching Group.
Yeah.
And I think you might have had some cards then, did you? clean
I think
language cards, deck of cards.
yes, yeah,
Yeah.
with rainbows on the back.
Yeah, I think I've still got those. But from the receiving end, the questions were fantastic. They really got me thinking, you know, what did this mean, and tapping into new insights. When I'm asking the questions, you know, I'm an executive coach, been doing it for years. I found it quite difficult just to stick to the questions. And sometimes I was just asking the questions, not intuitively, but just to follow the process. But obviously, they helped unlock the thinking in the other person.
Thank you. That is a common experience, that they unlock the thinking in the other person. Milda, what about you? What was the experience for you?
Well, I was the recipient of the questions from Gabriella, so therefore, so you're getting the kind of yin and yang of that experience. Yeah, I found it really interesting to be asked the questions, because you have to say something almost without thinking. And then when somebody asks the question to kind of follow up, you go, no, well, what did I mean by that? Was it just some random nonsense that came out of my mouth? Or what does it actually mean? So it kind of forces you to kind of think in a different way. But I kind of agree with Gabriella, it's kind of quite a discipline to just ask those questions, because you kind of want to ask some more stuff or ask in a different way. So I find it interesting to keep to that discipline, which I tried to do. I'm not sure, Katie, if I entirely managed that, but I kind of tried very hard to kind of just keep to that, to see then what happened as a result of.
Yeah, it's often a bit challenging to ask these questions for the first time, but being asked them is interesting, even when the person asking them is a little bit uncomfortable, a little bit unsure. Ma, would you say out loud what you put in the chat, please?
Sure. So when you showed the exercise, I asked myself those questions and I answered them in my head. But when we were in the session and someone, it was Kelvin at that point, was asking and pushing me to think further, new things came out. He actually asked me the second question twice. And then that second time, oh my God, like I ended up saying something that I hadn't even thought. Like it came out in speech before I thought of it, if that makes sense, before I processed it. So that was very interesting.
Interesting.
I wasn't expecting that at all.
Yeah, and that's the kind of thing that can happen with these questions. It doesn't always happen, but it often happens. It happens often enough to make it worth asking these questions. I'm pausing for thought to think. So what I was intending to do next was a slightly different. So what I was intending to do next was ask you to write in the chat your answer to that question. When you are innovating at your best, you are like what? If you're willing to, please write that in the chat now, your answer. And of course, it might have changed from when you first thought of it. That's one of the things that often happens when you're asked these questions. So please write in the chat your answer to the original question. Fantastic. And look at the difference. Notice the differences between these answers. While there are some similarities, there are also some very big differences. And we'll share the document with the chat in it as well, so that people outside this session can catch up. Okay, so let's move on with one more round. By the way, I hope you're meeting lots of lovely people in these conversations. We're combining the mixer with learning something, but a big chunk of the point of these conversations is to connect with people. It's it's a good way of finding out something different, something you never normally would ask about somebody. In a moment, we're going to repeat the activity, but we're going to do it slightly differently. We're going to start with a slightly different question. This time, I'm going to invite you to take a moment to think, when your team is innovating at its best, it is like what? Now, of course, some of you might have to improvise with what do you mean by team? Just any team that you're involved in, or any group of people you're involved in. Just choose something for the purposes of the activity. When your team is innovating at its best, it is like what? And then, James, could you mix the groups up, please, for this next activity?
I have shuffled, so hopefully people will find they're meeting different people.
Fantastic.
There's 4 rooms of 3, 1 room of 2.
Great. And if we go for let's keep the group, let's keep it at 10 minutes and see if we can do this really quickly. Okay, so the activity is exactly the same as previously, but you've got a different starting question. So once again, you're in 2s and 3s. Ask the Lazy Jedi questions about the original answer. If there's an observer, make sure people switch around at the relevant time. James, please open the rooms. Now, we have 3 minutes to close. So I'm going to very rapidly share with you some resources. They're in the slides. So if you check in the slide deck, you'll find a list of resources on the last 2 pages. Clean Language Revealing Metaphors, Opening Minds is the book I co-authored. I also strongly recommend this orange book called From Contempt to Curiosity, particularly if you're working with groups and teams. Really, really excellent book. And on the final page, there are a bunch of other links and other resources. You don't need to look at them now, but look at them through the slides. I hope you've met some brilliant, brilliant people in this session. The magic of the symposium is the system called crowdcoms, which should enable you to find each other relatively straightforwardly, so that you can continue these conversations, say thank you for the brilliance of the conversations, and generally connect with the people you've been mixing with in this session. I wish we could do a longer debrief about the activity that you just did, but I think it would be unreasonable. So instead, I'm going to invite you to write in the chat, what was your answer to when your team is innovating at its best? It is like what? Let's gather those up. So people just joining, we're in the last minute of the mixer session. We will be handing over to Niels in just a moment. We're just gathering up the answers to the last activity. And I'm going to invite one person to share out loud. What was different between the 2 sets of answers? Who'd like to comment on that? What was different? Maha, what did you notice?
I was just typing the chat. Do you mean the difference between self and the team
self and team
metaphor? Oh my God, the team metaphor is much more complex. And then as you asked the question, I think for me personally, I rethought it as I was answering the questions, and it became so complex that it stopped being a good metaphor, I think.
Love it.
To the extent
Thank
that
you
it became
so much.
Thank you.
We've hit the hour. We need to stop. Thank you so much for being part of this mixer. It's been brilliant fun. Thank you, everybody involved in the symposium. I've loved it. And let me throw the talking ball to David.